My name is Jason. I'm part of the Agrarian Climate Justice Coalition. And yeah, thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to our awesome speakers for helping to share this information with us. Just to give you a little context about why we are having this event and why we think that it's an important element to talk about as far as all the Earth Week events we have going on. So also thank you for the SCP for funding us in this event. And yeah, we brought this out as an event because we think that as far as whenever we're discussing in kind of like the main environmental issues, that there's a really big problem where it's continually separating what's seen as like the environment and the land as separate from people and the histories of peoples who have been taken from the lands and originally the caretakers of it, and how if we're going to be talking about these issues, that it's really a problem if we continue to separate them as issues that don't really have anything to do with each other. And I've been really lucky over the past years while working against tar sands infrastructure and development like the Keystone XL pipeline to meet a lot of these incredible folks who have I've been honored to learn a lot from, and to tell me how a lot of these things are a lot more complicated than they seem at the surface, and that if we want to actually work on addressing systematic exploitation of the land, that we can't separate that from the peoples, and especially the indigenous peoples who this was originally, you know, Turtle Island before, I mean it still is, but everything was pretty much fine until settler colonialism started to come around, and then these two issues at the beginning of colonialism and the environmental degradation of the continent are inherently linked with each other. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm going to give a really brief overview about tar sand in case people are unaware of the monster that is tar sands. It's pretty much the nastiest form of resource extraction that exists on the planet right now. If you haven't looked up any pictures of it, and you really should, it's quite scary. It's like Mordor exists in real life. And it's the major thing right now is in Alberta in Canada, and it's the largest construction project in the world right now. It's about the size of England, if not a little bit larger. And it's just essentially a massive environmental, the worst thing that's happening in the world right now, but it's also an ongoing aspect of genocide for, I believe it's the Chippewa Cree people who live there, that are at the receiving end of the Athabasca River there, and that their ways of life are essentially becoming impossible through the degradation of the land and the water there. And so not only are they being primarily impacted, but all across Turtle Island from Canada to here, there's the people that are being impacted by the tar sands are also the people that are most primarily beginning to fight back, and simultaneously, while defending the land, defending their responsibilities to the land as defenders of it, and challenging the legitimacy of the colonial institutions which continue to perpetuate this and shove us down our throats. So we're going to go through a different series of speakers, starting on the left, here with Reclaim Turtle Island, represented by Amanda, and then we're going to go from some incredible land defenders from the Pine Ridge, so-called Pine Ridge Reservation in Oglala Lakota territory, and then we're going to hear from some land defenders that work with Utah tar sands resistance here in our local bioregion, focusing on how this form of tar sands and resource extraction is also coming right here to our doorstep and sneaking quietly behind us in Utah. So, without any further ado, we'll start down here and let you introduce. And thank you very much.
Sengo Sewaguego, Yate Wagadariana did Sini Waxanoda Nokohola Naha, Donokinyo Doni Garino Ondo, Onaduago Hodinishoni. Greetings everyone. My name is Amanda Lickers, and I belong to the Turtle Clan of the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, otherwise known as the so-called Iroquois or the Six Nations. So I come from the Great Lakes region, and I currently live in Tiohtià:ke, so-called Montreal, Quebec, occupied Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk territory. So yeah, the first thing I guess I want to acknowledge the ancestors of these territories, of the Arapaho and the Cheyenne and Oklahoma, and that their relatives and their legacies still live on here, even beneath the violence of the concrete in these streets. I'm gonna start by a piece of spoken word, just to sort of kind of introduce some of my topics, so I'm just gonna get going. Firstly, KK Canada and the Untied Snakes are illegitimate settler colonial states built on genocide, slavery, apartheid, and hate. It's a legacy of forced relocation, systematic marginalization, and the project of extermination. Line 9 is the continued occupation of territories that have never been ceded because in the context of treaty relations, those that were canonized by the colonizers were made in a state of duress, coerced by promises never kept, and those that were made in our ways were broken by the violence of conquest. Line 9 is an imperial venture that represents the vested interests of Big Oil and Big Brother, extended contemporary theft. Squeezing dollars and cents, financing violence, rooted in deriving capital from the unthinkable, glorifying monetary economies instead of the richness of rotting trees, because these socially constructed conceptions of value erase red histories, and rip into the belly of the earth, that place from which we are all birthed, replacing the rhythms of creation with the cycles of consumption, strengthening the illusion of a capitalist conclusion of separate and isolated lives, which might be why corporations like Enbridge Pipelines can submit applications to further colonize, requesting without consultation permission to expand their operations on someone else's land. It's an ongoing war of conquest. Line 9 is an imperial venture that represents the vested interests of Big Oil and Big Brother, extended contemporary theft. Resource extraction, tar sands expansion, the ongoing industrialization of everything naturally created. Not only does this impact ourselves entirely as we continue to commodify the sacred, but we are destroying our biorelations, the impacts of which undermine my self-determination as part of a sovereign and independent nation. Because my Haudenosaunee considerations include these complex biologies, diverse ecologies, life systems of varying carrying capacity that determine the health of our territories, the lakes, the streams, and the peoples that they feed, which is why we cannot afford Enbridge greed. Line 9 is an imperial venture that represents the vested interests of Big Oil and Big Brother, extended contemporary theft. Downstream contamination, refineries beside reservations, surface mining, bitumen refining, the tar sands pipelines threaten our nations. For this type of destruction, there are no reparations. So what about those future generations? We need to embrace transformation and refuse intimidation and come together as community, because being Onwe comes with responsibility. And when we can see and we remember that the earth is our mother, then we have got to take a stand and together protect our lands. Takes this and turns it into this. That first slide is Lake Ontario, which is very sacred lake to the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, as well as many nations of the northeastern woodlands. And this is Toronto in the early 1800s. You can go to the next slide. So, when I say colonial capitalism, what I mean is kind of like looking at the logics of both capitalism and colonization and how they work co-constitutively. And a really good example of this is resource extraction as a phenomenon in our culture. And so this is actually a map of like proposed and contemporary tar sands pipelines, starting in the heart of Mordor, so-called Edmonton. That's when the refining starts. So that doesn't even show the point of production. The point of production, the place where they're mining, isn't even on this map. And actually, the largest Suncor refinery in Turtle Island is actually in Denver, and they also process tar sands. And as you can see, so that's from Sarnia to Westover up to Quebec. That's line 9, and you can see it actually just runs parallel with the Great Lakes, because that's really very clever. Yeah. And so this is actually a Suncor facility in Athabasca in northern Alberta. And so the logic of colonial capitalism allows us to actually remove ourselves from the natural world and see these things that as Indigenous people people we have familial relationships with, and we see them as other. And we look at our mother, the earth, that these things that give us life, right? Water, the sun, the other beings, you know, the four-legged, the two-legged, the crawlers, the swimmers. As for the Haudenosaunee, we have Hanagani Wadekwa, the words that come before all else, which in our territory we go through in order to acknowledge all aspects of creation because of how what you call in Eurocentric science ecosystems are so interrelated and require the delicacy of each other in order to survive and prosper. But colonial capitalism seeks to eradicate and destroy that. And as you can see, this is what production looks like. And so, it's really difficult to really understand how white supremacy, capitalism, colonization, cis-hetero patriarchy, how these systems of power that actually establish the norm and the standard in our society are violent. And it's very difficult to unsee and deconstruct these things. Even when you are directly impacted by that violence yourself, and it's a constant struggle of understanding. As actually Olowan uses that term. Yeah, and so I think something that I think, oh, this image sucks, but something that I think is really important I want to address with y'all folks is this notion of green capitalism and how NGOs and non-government organizations and other like not-for-profit organizations and as well as other types of institutions such as the academy actually work in this way to undermine grassroots and insurrectionary movements by mainstreaming them and actually undercutting some of the fundamental values. And so I use this image actually in Power Shift, which you can't really see, but the most important thing is you see a fist raised holding, what is that thing called? Yeah, a wind turbine, which is branded as this amazing alternative energy that's going to solve our energy solutions and we can move towards sustainable futures. But these types of sustainable futures that are articulated by this struggle are futures that sustain the occupation of Indigenous territories. They're futures that sustain the understanding of resource extraction. So whether you're looking to harness the sun or dam up the rivers and kill the salmon, and also in solar power you have to use copper, which is mined very violently from Indigenous territories, if not directly here in Turtle Islands, then also so-called Central and South America. So like the issue of land is constantly overlooked, and the legitimacy of the settler colonial nation state is constantly maintained and upheld. And for this reason, it's incredibly important for people who are looking to actually find real solutions towards tangible futures of liberation and understanding violence and power, have to work with the people who are most marginalized. And also for us who are most marginalized, to be able to articulate those violences for ourselves so that we can more strongly fight back. And I also wanted to include this image, the idea of green capitalism or greenwashing. A lot of the time too, unfortunately, what ends up happening is like environmental regulations end up being the focus of campaigns, or other legal and administrative routes end up being the primary focus for a lot of people's energy, like even with, say, fossil fuel divestment campaigns. And what that also often tends to result in is even just like cap and trade. So things like, and then the thing is that actually regulatory processes don't work. As we can see from a million different spills or contamination, like different things that have happened, like from Kalamazoo to the Gulf Coast to Fukushima, there absolutely is no power, even on behalf of the United States, Canada, the UN, to actually hold corporations accountable because the bottom line is the dollar sign, and there's no way they're going to pay to clean things up, And so these are like how, and this image shows like various aspects of capitalism from like a nuclear chain used as a weapon as well as an energy resource to like other forms of even like harvesting electricity like hydroelectric. And it requires constantly the clearing of land and the clearing of people, and like the attack on life itself. Internally, myself and some of my other Indigenous friends, we refer to the settler colonial culture as a death culture because it kills, it eats us alive. And as Indigenous people, we are the land. There's a really deep connection there, where there's stories from how we came to be as people since time immemorial. And these are the sites, these are our legacies, these are our ancestors, and these are our future communities that are under attack, in this present moment. So I want to borrow from a phrase in the Indigenous feminist world, speaking back to white feminism: fuck your waves, we're an ocean. And so this is in reference, obviously, to the multiple waves of feminism and how they have a very eugenic origin, actually, and have worked to solidify, particularly the advancement of cis white women for a white society. And where Indigenous and Black folks, in particular women, were targeted for forced sterilization and all kinds of other lovely things in the first and second wave, and the third wave is super transphobic and cis-sexist and trans-misogynist. But anyway, so the reason I want to talk about this idea of we're an ocean is that as Indigenous people, we've been fighting resource extraction, we've been fighting colonization, we've been fighting white supremacy and capitalism since 1492. We've been fighting against these systems and powers of invasion since they first set foot on these shores, before probably most of your ancestors arrived, And for this reason, I think it's really important, if we're looking to build meaningful change, to be creating coalitions and alliances with peoples who have legacies and histories of struggle where you are. And so for me, obviously, that includes, that starts with Indigenous people, but that's not the only place as well. I think it's really important for people to be thinking about where are you at, physically, literally. What is the history of Denver? What has happened here? And who do you need to be accountable in building, and trying to seek towards your own liberation in order to build collective liberation. And so this actually is from the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, which we're from Reclaimed Turtle Island is friends with it. And it says environmental violence is a reproductive justice issue. And this piece of art was made by my Nidazan, Erin Consmo, who's Métis from Fort Lachine up north into Alberta. And you can see here, this is obviously a brown woman, this is an Indigenous woman who has a gas mask over her breast. And so for those who might not know about what is environmental violence is a particular form of violence that in particular Indigenous, Black, and other communities of color experience in relationship to basically environmental toxins and exposures due to either point of processing, so either mining and other direct extraction, or often through living fence line to a refinery, because very rarely do they put a Suncor refinery in the white neighborhood. And so part of environmental violence speaks to our connection as Olowan as original people to our territories, and it's a really personal thing, because for me, the piece of spoken word I'm going to close with, we'll touch on this, for me as Haudenosaunee, we're mound builders with our dead. And I think that's an important piece of information to share, because people don't realize they're walking over our ancestors all the time. In the city of Toronto, in the city of Montreal, in Ithaca, upstate New York, those mounds are actually our relatives. And this idea of being the land is made all that more visceral and concrete by that cultural information. And when we receive our medicines from our territories, when we drink our water, which is our first medicine, from our territories, if those things are contaminated, if they are running with the contamination of death culture, whether it's benzene or uranium, those things biologically accumulate, and very much so in breast milk. And so what you see is also an attack on our reproductive bodies as Indigenous women and Indigenous peoples who carry children, as well as an attack on our next generations. And so as also as a matrifocal society, our clans are carried by our women. And when we attack Indigenous women's bodies, we're actually attacking an Indigenous nation. So these are acts of war on our own territories. And for this reason, I want to bring up this idea of invader. So I want to kind of make a distinction. Often people will use Indigenous to where you're living. But I just want to talk about this for a quick second because there's different historical relationships to land. So as Indigenous people, that's our historical relationship. We are originally from here. Like, we have emergence places. And the idea of settlement is that you came and you settled and you're not where you are from. But I think that there should be some more nuance around that. And especially I've been hearing a lot from Black community for folks who are descendants of people who were kidnapped and forcibly relocated from their homelands in order to live in chattel slavery under a white supremacist settler colonial government known as the United States, and Canada had slavery too, that maybe settler doesn't fit as well. And so I think until I can hear something coming directly from African diaspora about how they want to be referred to, I think what I would like to do is talk about the idea of whites as invaders. And also as Indigenous people, we can be settlers if we're not on our own territories, and to give some space for Black and brown folks as settlers that isn't as charged with that power relationship. The reason we use the term cracker, it's one of the very few slurs against whites, it's in reference to holding the whip, And so we're speaking directly back to power. These are really important things. And so I just wanted to throw that nuance out there, and that also migrant communities who have been forced to leave their own territories, whether it was 400 years ago you were kidnapped, or whether it's because Barrick Gold has just destroyed your territories and you need to now actually come to Canada, the country where Barrick Gold is from, in order to survive. There's a lot of circumstances of duress that are a result of globalized capitalism and colonization. But regardless, and so to migrant communities, we have a shared investment and struggle against white supremacy, against colonialism, and the ways that they have impacted our communities in different yet intersecting ways. And it's very important, that we build that power between us, because we have reasons to trust each other, and so what I wanted to sort of also talk about, sort of point out too, is that the three areas that I want to say for people who are not Indigenous to these lands, the first thing you have to do is to get educated, and also, there should be someone who's Arapaho or someone who is Cheyenne who's part of this, and this shows how their erasure, the intentional extermination. I should probably get going because I'm feeling it's taking a long time now. But anyway, so education is one of the most important things that you can do to start to understand your own white supremacy, and how we internalize, even as racialized people, internalize white supremacy. But especially if you benefit from that system of power, it is completely on you to understand how you are causing violence in other people's lives, even if you think it's a small thing that you don't understand. This is why you have to build relationships and you have to get educated, as well as to understand the history of the territories you're on in order to be able to even have a good idea of how can you support. You have to know what the issues are. And also to get humble and prepare to be unsettled, because unsettling is our goal, right? And also to use your access to resources, to systemic power, to support front lines and grassroots people who are working directly with their own communities, because that is one of the most intense barriers sometimes. And knowing that a lot of the time, academic spaces like this actually use Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous bodies, Indigenous land, in order to exist, right? And so how can you be giving back and taking that harm reduction approach? And then so the last slide, this is the I Walk the Belt, which is the symbol of unity amongst the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I just want to take this moment just to sort of talk a little bit about our people, because on the previous slide you saw there was an eagle, right? And the United States, I don't know how many of you know this, you should know the Iroquois Confederacy, you should know my people, the Haudenosaunee, because the United States wouldn't have a constitution without us. The idea of democracy did not start in Greece, that was born on Turtle Island, like many moons ago. And so the idea of even a Senate, you know, like these are the ways in which the insidious theft is made to seem so normal, right? And I don't think it's any mistake that Eagle, Ogwex, for our people, who is like a very honored amongst Haudenosaunee and many other nations, is now the symbol for the United States of America. You know, this is like cultural theft. These are moments of, you could say, cultural appropriation, so whether you're a white person with dreadlocks or like Asian characters as a tattoo or any of these types of things. You know, this is like part of that entitlement, not only over our lands, our bodies, but also our cultures and our spiritualities. And so as Longhouse people, we would meet in the clans, and then our clans would meet in our nation, and then our nations would go to the Confederacy and meet in the Central Fire in Onondaga Lake, which is also destroyed by the state of New York. Yeah, and so those are a few things I wanted to say, I guess. I just want to close with a poem that's kind of intense. There is some reference to sexual violence, so just as a trigger warning, I guess. And this poem for me is like a lot about land trauma, and there's some intercultural references you might not understand, but it is the heaviness in my lungs that remembers, the reflections in the water. Lifetimes ago, the smell still stings the warm orange glow, the crackle of burning longhouses. Our eldest sister rendered charred ashes. Yes, we called him village destroyer. Screams of our people billow shrill. That rage still rattles on in a subatomic particle as it passes through my ventricle. The genetic memory of place unfolds of the trauma manufactured in that space. As I learn, I am displaced. The city pavements wash away, buried deep, these cement streets sweep clean. Erase the violence. Shivers through my body, shivers through our territories. Words insufficient, the syllables cannot spring from my tongue intimately enough. No articulation of the invasion. There is a deep feeling of devastation penetrating me. Ripped our bodies from our territories and then from our families. Remember our clans, we are the land. I'm second generation, not stolen from my mommy, and the pain that has marked each passing of my family is more than the testimony of any one voice. It is a compilation of violent centuries, and comes now with the knowledge that history repeats. Imposition of external force, my body, my flesh and bone, the blood that flows, deemed expendable, terra nullius, for conquest. And do they still call it incest if you're asleep? The first time he touched me, I was 8. When I was 16, I realized it was only a matter of time until my body would be assumed not mine. Commodified, objectified, the abuse passed on, more insidious, with the loss of each song, each cornstalk burned, gone, like the words once pressed so easily from my ancestors' tongue. Unwinding a legacy of colonial campaigns, raids to scorch the earth, left scars torched mother, bound her by steel rods kilometers long, and that the tissue marked by pain is deeper than surface, it surrounds us, presenting the monumental task to pursue the relentless undoing of all that has been thrust upon us. We have survived, starting by building our own trust to leave behind the husk of internalized genocide.
Alright, so before we have our next speaker, thank you very much. We have a short video we were going to show to lead up before our next speaker. And I forgot to mention this at the end, there's also going to be a Q&A session at the end. So after everyone's spoken, if you have any burning questions, I'll be going around the mic, so we'll have that at the end. But first we have this video before our next speaker starts.
It's Julie Richards. I'm a member of the Olowan Lakota tribe and from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. We thought the video would be appropriate because I almost became one of these statistics out of white clay. There was a time in my life where I thought that alcohol was the only thing there for me to take away my pain, my hurt. And I got lost in that. I got lost in that town for a whole year. Lost everything, my children. Main thing were my children. I lost them. And my sister, they set up a camp right by there, by White Clay, and my son became an active member of the camp. And I guess that's basically what really gave me the strength to open my eyes and give up the alcohol and to help and to try to defend our land. White Clay is only 2 miles from our reservation, from the town of Pine Ridge, 2 miles, and it's walking distance. So a lot of our people, that's where they live, and a lot of them have died there. And I just lost a lot of people from there that I became really close with, called them brother, sister. A couple of them are still alive. It's been 7 years since the last time I was there, since I lived there and was lost to the poison of alcohol. And that's a lot of it, that's what's killing our people today. I lost a lot of relatives also from it. Our children are being taken away because of it. And so I figure, you know, instead of putting all this energy into drinking alcohol, I could switch it around and become make it positive and try to help our people back home. And so once my son became really involved in the camp and I seen what they were doing, my sister was doing protests, they were doing, you know, really getting out there and making noise for the world to see how these fat takers, another way of trying to kill our people, another way of germ warfare to us, to our people. And so I quit drinking and I started really paying attention to things going on around our reservation. My aunt does the moccasins on the ground to fight the pipeline. I got interested in that. I started attending them, the trainings, the Unite to Fight. I start researching different things on how, you know, we could make lives better for our children's lives better on our reservation. And so to clear my own mind and help me to become stronger, I quit drinking alcohol. I gave it up. Since I've got my children back, and now I try to help our people best I can and any way I can. And we traveled to Utah to the tar sands mine last year with Victor and them. We do different things. Right now, mainly, a lot of our focus is to fight the pipeline, to not let it come through our lands, to not let it poison the water, to not let it poison anything else on what little bit of land we have left from what the government put us on. And so that's basically where I am right now. Yeah, just help wherever I can help. I will, you know, I will do that for my children, my grandchildren, for the future of our tribe. Yeah, that's it.
Hello everyone, my name is Olowan Martinez. I came here today from Oglala territory. You know, it's my honor and my pleasure to be here. You know, they wanted me to speak to everyone about our thoughts and our plans and ideas to stop the KXL pipeline and just to stop all extraction. You know, myself, I actively started taking a more active role within the resistance about 5 or 6, no, I think it's been about 7 years now. But, you know, I started with to battle liquid genocide that was happening to the Oglala Nation. Growing up within my culture and everything, and also being the first free-born generation of the Oglala, I knew it was time that things had to be different. But let me explain that term there, the first free-thinking generation of the Oglala. My mother, she was the last forced generation of boarding school children, the last one. So it ain't too far behind us that our relatives were forced into living a certain way. So I always express that we are the first free-thinking generation of the Oglala Lakota. And this generation that's coming before us is, you know, we have no hindrance on us. There's no one telling us that the way we pray is wrong. There's no one telling us that the way we look is wrong. There's all these things that were being shoved down our throat. It's not there anymore. You know, so it's our obligation to break the dysfunctions that were shoved down our throats. So that's what I mean when I say we're the first free-thinking generation of the Oglala Lakota, because there's nothing forced about us. You know, so at home we deal with a lot of internal things. You know, traditional policing is something that we're actively doing in our homelands. Recently, we've been, you know, targeting meth dealers in our communities, kicking in doors, you know, in our traditional ways. The worst thing you can have done to you is your TV poles be broken by the Kichita societies, the warrior societies. That was the ultimate shame for our household. So we've taken it upon ourselves to start implementing that traditional policing into our communities. You know, it's a pretty big and dangerous step because we face our own people. But the way I see it is we're not facing our own people, we're facing a mask of colonization. And some of these masks are so welded onto our relatives that I don't know if they'll ever come out of it. So all we can do is reach their generations that aren't born yet and pray and hope that they don't have that mask either. You know, the mask of colonization amongst the Oglala is a horrible thing. You know, it's bad. It's really bad, but the bigger picture, what I see it is Fat Taker trying to take out the spiritual masters of this continent. You know, and that's just how it is. You know, the way I see it is Fat Taker, once he knows that he gets rid of the indigenous people of this continent, then he's free to do whatever he wants to the land. So of course, why do you think they target us the most? Why do you think we're living in such a horrible poverty? You know, because they know that once we're gone, they can do whatever they want to the land, because the original landowners will be out of the way. But being from this free-thinking generation, you know, it's my pleasure to make sure that never happens. You know, those things are important to us, and decolonizing the minds of our future generations is big. You know, so the way I see it is the bigger picture that includes everyone here in this room is building Earth's army. Everyone has a place within Earth's army, whether it's the child line to the front line, you'll have a place, but no one rides for free. You know, because I really want everyone to put some deep thought into this concept. What if the lights went out tomorrow and we're never to come back on? How would you feed yourselves? How would you go to the bathroom? What are you gonna do? I know what you're gonna do. You're gonna come running to us, asking us to feed you, but being free thinkers, we're not going to. So we ask that you open your eyes and open your minds and decolonize. And if you want your future generations to eat, you better learn to hunt. So there's a connection to everything. Everyone that's in this room, you're here for a reason. Us here on this stage, we're here for a reason. Everything, there's a reason behind everything. And the bigger picture is to see why. Why were you meant to be in this room to hear our words? We deal with all kinds of things, but being the free thinkers, we're handling things right. We gotta make the movement, the resistance stronger. So myself, sometimes I become a hermit, because I don't want to be around anybody, because the work's too hard, it's too much sometimes. And I didn't know what I was suffering from. But a good advisor to me today, her name is Nina Washte, she's from up north. She gave it a diagnosis, it's called chronic resistance. And I realized that I was born with this. I was born with this chronic resistance. It's in my blood. There's no way I can just be a human walking on this earth. My roots are here. My roots are here. I have obligation, but that it's no longer obligation to myself, it's my pleasure to make sure that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren have clean water to drink and land to live and grow. Like I said, I feel like, Fat Taker, his focus is on the Indigenous nations. And it's, there was a time in my life where I didn't trust anyone who wasn't a Lakota. There wasn't a time where I would even shake the hand of a white man, because I was raised with the red supremacist. Like I said, she was the last fourth generation of the boarding school era of our homeland. She suffered traumas unimaginable from men and women that did things in the name of a God that we know nothing about. So she hated white people. It was always something to go into a store with her because I knew something was gonna go down. She just couldn't handle it. Someone looked at her wrong, that was it. We were dragging her out of the store before the cops came. It's just how it was. So I take the energy of her racism and I give it a different direction. I put the racism of myself. I'm able to, through decolonization and sobriety, I'm able to focus my anger, to focus the trauma, and point it in a good direction and let it go. And for me, that's to break every single dysfunction that was given to us. So to me, the bigger picture is building Earth's army, like I said. Because everyone has to take an active role in it, everybody. Because if you're not willing to pick up arms and fight for the water, why should we fight for it for you? The age of white privilege is also over. That's something that we discuss with our children and make sure that they realize that they know what it is. And it's really crazy, because some of my young nieces and nephews, I teach them what white privilege is. I talk to them about it, and they come home, Mom, Auntie, my teacher has that. They know. They know what it is. I make sure they know. And I make sure they know exactly what to say when they check them on it. Because like I said, the age of the bent over Indian is over. That's a quote from Russell Means that I use all the time, and people get just, I can't believe she said that. But that's something I grew up hearing most of my life. I was born and raised within the American Indian movement also. My father, he's a Salt River Indian from Arizona. My mother is from Oglala territory. My father was at the occupation of Alcatraz. He met my uncles who were Thunderhawk men and went back to the reservation to fight with the Oglala, and he met my mother there. So there's a lot of intermarriages that happen because of the resistance and the movement within our territories also. So myself in our homeland is another thing I advocate for, is that no Ogallala marry another Ogallala. It just shouldn't happen anymore. You know, these reservation has just left our family trees to grow like wild bushes. You know, they need to be groomed and cleaned and taken care of. And the only way is to destroy the illusion of these so-called reservations. You know, so a lot of things in this day and age are changing. A lot of things. And, you know, my bigger goal, what I worry about is how will my 8-year-old daughter survive when I'm gone? Who's going to show her the way? Who's going to be involved in the resistance? Is it going to be a bunch of, you know, alcoholic, drug-using, whining warriors? Or are we going to have strong men to fight for our nations? You know, those things I worry about too. And, you know, I just, everything has a connection. You know, every part of this pipeline, from her territory to our territory to his, you know, it's just, it's horrible. I mean, I always tell people, you know, you drink water, don't you? We all drink water. You know, your dogs, your cats, they drink water. Imagine if they didn't have any more water. And it's crazy because in some of the towns that we go to address people, they don't want to think about it for themselves, but if you put it in the term of their pets, then they seem to comprehend. I don't get that. You know, because I don't even have I have one grandson. His name's Theodore, and I worry about his children already, and he's not even 2 yet. I worry about his children. What's going to be left here when his children are grown adults? What's going to be left standing? Because in our culture, we know that Mother Earth will shake her back soon. You know, so within ourselves, we know that only the strong will survive. Only the strong will survive. So which is why I always say, if you want your children to eat, you better learn to hunt. Because all these things, you know, so that's a big thing that we work on at home. We teach all the young men, we want them to learn to hunt, we want them to be able to have the skills to defend land and water physically. You know, and so when we did this stuff in White Clay, what she was talking about was the camp was a zero tolerance camp that we put up right on the border of White Clay. And for years I attended the March for Justice. The March for Justice started 15, 16 years ago when 2 Lakota men were found brutally murdered outside of White Clay. A hatchet was used on their bodies, and they were totally, head almost severed, arms almost severed. You know, someone hated them so much that they continued to hit them over and over with a hatchet until they were dead and just left them there. You know, so they started the March for Justice to bring justice for them, but there's never been no justice. No men have ever gone to jail for those murders. Nobody. Nobody has ever paid for that crime. So every year their families, they march for justice. They want to be peaceful and everything. You know, for myself, I truly believe that peaceful anything is, I don't even want to say it. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being the quiet, obedient, good little Indian, waiting in line for whatever you want to throw at me. I'm taking it back and throwing it back at you, because that era of the Indian is over. You know, so I had a little bit of hesitations about coming to talk here, because the way I see it is that my feet need to be on the ground somewhere. You know, but I came here to treat my chronic resistance, and I spent $420 here. And it was good for me. I'm ready to go back and get back into it and focus on what we're doing at home. You know, we've had a rash of suicides within our reservation. Since December, we've had at least about 14 or 15 since December. The majority of them are young women under 18. You know, so another connection that Amanda made before, and that I always talk to my nieces and nephews about, is the attack on the women. Everything they do to the land, they do to our bodies. You know, they just, the forced sterilization, you can see it in the women and in the land. There's just a big connection to everything. You know, Fat Taker wants to destroy us. And now that some of your eyes are open, you're next. They don't want you around either. Because your eyes are open, you know, you see. You know, it's real good to see Jimmy Bacon here. When I first met Jimmy, you know, he talked to me about the seed bombs and, you know, planting and stuff like this, you know, and the Oglalas, we're not really planters, we're hunters and gatherers. You know, so farming was never really our thing. Staying in one spot was never really our thing. You know, this whole mid-continent was ours. Even other tribes knew not to F around. The Oglala Lakota Nation was the mightiest warrior nation. So the way I see it with my decolonized eyes is that of course they want us out of the way. Because once we're gone, who's gonna back up everyone else? You know, who's gonna fight to the death? Who will stake themselves to the ground? I know none of you will. For the Black Hills, maybe Wombly. But those are big issues, you see, like, you know, I mean, to me, they're just so important, and I can stress myself out about it, but I choose not to. I take baby steps in what I do. Every calculated step we take is for the bigger picture, to grow Earth's army. So like I said, everyone has their place within Earth's army, from the chow line to the front line. But you have to find where you fit in. Because sitting on the outside just watching isn't going to cut it anymore. Time to get off the fence. It's really time to get off the fence and decide, you know, if you want your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren to eat. If you don't even have kids yet, you better start thinking about it. You know, because that's what it's all about, is the future generations. If we keep letting Fat Taker destroy it, what's going to happen? So, you know, I mean, liquid genocide, eco genocide, there's just so many genocides that they all practiced them on us. Now they're going to use them on you. You know, that's how it goes. And I just encourage everyone to learn everything and anything you can on the resistance to stop extraction of this planet. Not just here on our continent, but everywhere. You need to really put some thought into it and take active action for it. Because like I said, you know, we ain't gonna fight for you, we ain't gonna feed you, we ain't gonna house you. We're gonna have to be stingy and mean this time when it comes down to it. You know, so that's just fair warning also. You know, my daughter, her name is Wanachja. Did you ever see a wild bush of sunflowers? That's what her name means. And everything I do is for her and her children and her grandchildren. I just, you know, everything happens for a reason, like I said. So we're all here in this room together for a reason. So feel free to come up and talk to me and ask me anything you want. Something I always share with people and my own relatives is ask and I'll tell no lies. Thank you.